I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff. Today I'm going to make some really simple work tables with some really cool features. This is my new shop. Now, I haven't done anything down here except move my stuff in and just put it against the walls. So I have a ton of work to do. I've got lighting to do, I've got walls to cover, I've got electrical to run, and lots of organization. But the first thing I need to do is build a new workbench. Last week on my live stream on Twitch, I decided to have a collaborative design session. I talked to everybody in the chat and told them I wanted to make a big work table and asked for ideas. So we all worked together and came up with a really cool idea. In my shop, I wanted a big table to work on, but I also kind of didn't want a big table because they're kind of hard to work around and sometimes they just eat up a lot of space. So together we came up with the idea for the Voltron of workbenches. It's a few smaller tables that will connect together to make one big one when you need it. It's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited about it. Let's get started. The construction for this table is extremely simple, and I designed it in a way so that there's only a few different sizes of 2x4 to cut. Let's talk about the materials. I've got 3 sheets of 1/2-inch MDF. You could use something else if you wanted to, but MDF is nice and sturdy and very flat. I've also got a 4x8 sheet of 1/8-inch hardboard. This is sometimes called masonite too. It's a really thin, inexpensive cover to put on the top of the table, so if you mess it up, you can easily take it off and put down a new sheet to have a nice, clean tabletop. I've also got a whole bunch of locking casters and some spray paint. There's a few more things that go into this down the road, and I'll show you those when we get to them, but right now, let's put together the frame. I'm going to end up making 3 tables, and between them, I need a whole bunch of pieces of 2x4 cut to length. In fact, I need 20 pieces cut to the exact same length. I'm going to set up a stop block on my miter saw so I can just put the pieces in, chop it, and move on to the next piece and get through them really quickly. There's a really quick and easy way to do that because my miter saw is fixed in place and it's not going to slide back and forth. First, I'm going to measure out the length that I need on a board and mark it with a pencil. Then I just make sure that that mark is lined up exactly where it needs to cut with the blade. And while I've got the workpiece held firmly in place, I lay another scrap piece of wood right against the end of it and drive in some screws to the table. So now every time I put a 2x4 up against that piece, I know it's exactly the right distance from the blade. Then I just have to make a whole bunch of cuts. Just a few minutes later, I've got all the 2x4s cut. In case you were curious, I use 16 8-foot 2x4s, which is a lot, but there's only this much waste left from all of those pieces. I cut the 2x4s into 3 different sizes, one for the legs, one for the long sides, and one for the short sides. And setting up a stop block like that makes it very quick and easy, and make sure that all of your pieces are exactly the same length. Next up, I'm just going to screw them together and make the frames for the top and bottom. To make the frame, I'm just going to screw these together end to end. It's really simple. But the important thing here is to make sure that you get these pieces overlaid in the correct direction. You want to make sure that they're laid out this way so that the final dimensions of the table will be 24 by 48. I'm going to drive some 2.5-inch screws from the outside of these long boards into the short board and make sure that I pre-drill all of these holes before I screw them in. Since the holes are so close to the end of the board, if you don't pre-drill them, there's a good chance you're going to split the wood. Now I've got 3 sets of frames ready to go. Each one of the smaller tables has 2 rectangles, and then the large table has 2 big squares. At this point, all of these frames are very flexible in one direction. You can see that they flex a lot here, and that's okay now because these are going to be tied together a lot better once the MDF goes on. But the next step is to tie the top frame to the bottom frame, and you do that by screwing in the leg piece. Those get screwed on to the face here where you see the end grain of the 2x4, not the other face. It's kind of important later on. Those are going to get screwed on just like I did with all the other construction, making sure that they are flush with the top of the top frame and the bottom of the bottom frame. And when I do that, it's really important that I don't screw those in where I'm going to be installing the magnets later on down the road. All the frames are put together now. They're ready to put on the MDF on the top and on the bottom shelves, but before I do that, I'm going to put on some casters. That MDF is going to make these things a lot heavier, so since I'm going to have to flip them over, I'm going to add the casters now, flip them over, and then add the sheets. I got 12 locking casters. Each one of these is rated for about 125 pounds a piece. I got enough to go on each corner of each table. And I'm just gonna screw them right into the 2x4s. Because these are made of 2x4s, which are not always perfectly straight, some of these joints are not super tight, and that causes these edges to not necessarily be exactly 48 or 24 inches. They're usually within a 1/16 and an 1/8 at the most, and that's not a big deal in this case. So I'm gonna measure the outside dimensions of each one of these tables individually and cut a piece of MDF to fit exactly edge to edge. Once I get those in place, I'm gonna pre-drill and countersink the holes to drive screws in directly into the studs through the MDF. I wanna make sure that those screw heads are flush with the surface because there's another coating going on top after. And after I get those tops put on, I'll use the same process to add the bottom shelves. We got that first corner in and it is square, but as we turn this around, you can see that the other sides do not always match up. And that's because the 2x4 frame is just not square by itself. But there's a way around that. We attach the first corner in that direction, and now we're gonna attach this opposite corner by forcing it into place, bending the frame and driving in the screw. By putting these opposite two corners in place correctly with the corner, the other two corners are gonna be really, really close to where they need to be. Here's a little thing I didn't expect. That 4x8 sheet of hardboard that I got for the top of this is not actually 4x8. Instead of 48 inches wide, it's 47.5 inches. I don't know why, but that forces me to have a little bit of a gap on two sides of this. It's not a huge deal, but next time I go to replace this top, I'll probably use 1/8 inch plywood. That way I know that the final sheet is actually 4x8. I'm gonna go ahead and screw this top on in the same way, just countersink some screws in a couple of places to hold it down, but I actually decided that I'm gonna move the sheet so that all of the extra gap is on one side rather than split between two sides. And the reason for that is so that the one side that has the big gap on it is gonna back up to the table saw as the outfeed. The other three sides will be all the way to the edge, and then when I line them up with the other tables, there won't be a big seam. For these smaller tables, I'm going to use some smaller screws to attach the hardboard just to the MDF and not through it into the frame, because these MDF tops are going to need to hinge. I'm going to use some really short screws for this, and I have to countersink through the top of this, but the material is very thin. The countersink will go right through it, and then you'll end up with too big of a hole if you're not careful. I've got some more MDF to put down here on the bottom shelf, so I'm going to lay this in place, drive in some screws, then flip the whole cart over and add another piece in this section and screw it on as well. Now comes the really cool part, getting these tables to stick together like Voltron. We're going to use magnets for that. In fact, really big rare earth magnets. These are neodymium magnets, and they are pretty strong and pretty big. You don't necessarily have to go this big, but I wanted to make sure that they had plenty of strength. In each corner of each table, we're going to put a magnet in one face and a washer in the other face. And we're always going to put them in the same configuration so that anytime this corner hits a different corner on a different table, they will match up. The magnet of the other table will always hit this washer, and the washer of the other table will always hit this magnet. I measured down the same distance on both sides of these corners and the same distance from the outer edge, so that the center point of this one is the same place as the center point of that one. So when two corners meet, the center of these two things should be the same and they should line up. On each corner of each table, I'm going to make the exact same markings. I'm going to use a Forstner bit to bore out a bigger hole to put the magnet in because it's pretty thick. The washer I'm just going to screw in on the face so it's a little bit proud of the surface. That will help it connect to the magnet that it's trying to reach. It's just a matter of screwing those in and this corner is good to go. Now I'm going to add it to 3 more corners and then we're going to do a little test to see if the two tables will stick together. And if they don't, it's okay because we can always add another set of magnets and washers below these that will increase the grab strength on each one of these corners. Next, I'm going to put the tops onto these little tables so that they can hinge open and I can get to that storage that I built in onto the inside. This is going to be hinged on this back edge with something called a piano hinge or a continuous hinge. It's really just one long hinge that runs from end to end. These are really easy to install. I mean, it's basically just a hinge, but in this case, I want to make sure that it's recessed a little bit underneath the top so that this side of the top isn't lifted. I want the whole top to be as flat as possible. To make that recess, I'm going to use a straight bit in my router and then use an edge guide on the router as well to run along this back side and cut away just enough material so that the hinge fits down into it and is flush with the top. To make sure that I get the right depth on the bit, I just put the hinge right on top of the router and then adjust it so that the tip of the bit is flush with the top of the hinge. I'm going to line up the outside of this hinge with the outside edge because I don't want it to protrude and get in the way of the tables connecting. So I'm going to try to get it completely lined up and flush out here and then punch some holes to start the screws. That hinge will help it attach and go up and down, but it's kind of heavy because it's a solid piece of MDF, so to assist that a little bit, I'm going to use these gas struts. These are really inexpensive ones that I found, but they can get very expensive, so just be sure to look for the cheap ones unless you want to spend a lot of money. These install really easily on the inside. They have 2 points of contact and you can twist them however you need to make sure that they can connect to the 2 sides that you need to connect. Just follow the instructions, they're really easy. You screw in the 2 pieces, snap these into place, and you're good to go. The hinge and the gas struts help it to open and close kind of safely and easily, but you also need a simple way to open it. To do that, I'm going to use the trim router to cut a slot all along this front edge so you have a place for your fingers to go to grab the top. That's as far as I'm going to take the build on these tables right now. There are some things I want to add in the future, but I want to use them in the shop first before I add those things. And while I tell you about those things, let's see the tables in action. Work tables, unite! One of the big things I definitely want to add to these tables in the future is a shelf underneath at least the smaller tables. The large table is going to have a shop vac and a compressor underneath it, so it doesn't need a shelf. But the smaller ones would be awesome to have a shelf to hold power tools so that they could be ready to use anytime I need them. For them to be ready to use, that means those tables also have to have some sort of a power source under them. So eventually I'm going to add a power strip underneath the table somewhere. First, I want to use these in the shop to make sure that I don't put those power strips in a place that gets in the way, but eventually I think it'll be mounted underneath the tabletop or on the inside of the leg. It'd be really nice to have a jigsaw or a sander there just ready to go. I could run an extension cord over to the table, plug it in, and get to work. So I'm going to add the shelf, I'm going to add the power, and also on the smaller tables I need to add some sort of a layer on the inside of that storage so things don't roll around when I'm rolling the table around. I'll probably use some sort of a foam mat or something like that, I'm not exactly sure yet. But if you wanted to get really fancy, you could always put in Kaizen foam or something like that and cut out spots for specific tools. I probably won't do that, but who knows. I figured out another big thing on these while I was putting them together, and I wanted to kind of warn you about this. I tried really hard to get 2x4s that were nice and straight, but even those are not perfectly straight. So when you put things together like this, not all of the faces and not all of the edges are going to line up. Now typically that wouldn't matter very much, but when you're trying to get 2 magnets to stick together, they have to actually be close enough to grab. So there are a few corners on these tables that are bowed just enough to where they don't actually grab the magnet. I mean, the good thing is here that all the sides of all the tables connect, so you can just spin them around to find a better connection, but it's just something to think about. Try to make all of your corners and your faces as square as possible so that the magnets and the washers can line up. There you go, some really simple, sturdy workbenches that can be customized to be whatever you need in your shop. I want to say a big thanks to my community on Twitch who helped me brainstorm the ideas for these tables, gave me lots of great ideas. If you want to come hang out with us, go to twitch.tv/ILikeToMakeStuff. I stream every week. It's a great community. It's a lot of fun. I'm really glad to finally be able to bring you a project from my brand new shop. I'm going to have a lot more videos about setting this shop up and getting it ready to actually make better videos, so that'll be coming soon. But in the meantime, I've got lots of other projects that you may be interested in, so be sure to check those out. And I've got some new home renovation videos that are going to be listed right here. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Also on the smaller tables, I got to put something on the inside of that cabinet. Storage?